everybody, it's Renee here, and today we're going to be creating a David Bowie piece using our gel plate with some Posca pens and some paints. This was a fun one. I loved creating this, and with this I found this David Bowie picture, I guess, on the internet. So I decided I was going to print it off on my laser jet and put this underneath my 5x7 gel plate and trace it. So I traced it the best I could, and I will show you how we're going to do this. I'm just grabbing some washi tape, and with the washi tape it's basically just going to hold our gel plate down to the paper so it doesn't move while we're tracing. So grab any kind of washi tape you have. You can use painter's tape as well if you want to use painter's tape, or masking tape as long as you can remove it after. So like I said, I'm using a 5x7 gel plate, and I found this was a good size for this one because it fit the image really well. So I wasn't actually cutting anything off by actually tracing it. So I have a ton of Posca pens, and I decided I was going to use black for the outside. But first, I decided I need to clean off my gel plate really well. Normally I would just leave it, but with something like this, I decided to clean off the area, primarily that his face, his hair, and his hands are. The other areas I didn't worry as much about because I thought if those show up in the background, that's okay. Really, it's up to you what you want to do, but I cleaned it the best I can, and I'm cleaning it with just a wipe and some baby oil and drying it off with a paper towel. So my Posca pens, I have a few different black ones. I have a 3M, a 5M, and then the big guy. I decided not to use the big guy for anything, but just use the 3. So I used the 3 to trace out his head, and anywhere for the most part that was black. So that's what I'm doing right now. I just want to remind everybody, if these are the kind of things you like to see online, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and hit that bell notification and the all so you get more videos like this coming up. Also, hit the like, not only to just say you like my videos, which I really appreciate, but it also gives you other videos that are similar sent to you in your notifications that you might enjoy watching. Thanks to everybody who subscribed already. It's greatly appreciated. So with this now, I am tracing, and I am going to use the red. This is also a 3M, and I'm going to put red in his hair. For those of you familiar with David Bowie, back in the day, which to me this looks like it was back in the Ziggy Stardust days, he had more of an orange hair, but I decided the orange was too orange. He would have looked like a pumpkin. So I decided to do red. So I'm filling in inside the black outside edge with red Posca pen. I've had many people asking me about beading when they're using their Posca pens. I'm going to have a Q&A, or if you even have any questions, don't forget to send me an email at createandplaywithrenee@gmail.com, and I will try and help you out the best I can. So I'm just filling this in. There are some white spaces. I decided not to leave a lot of the white space because I thought in the gel plate it might be hard to tell what that is. And then with doing backgrounds, you're gonna have the background in his hair. So I filled in all those spaces with our red pen. This is a fun one. I love doing gel plates with the Poscas. You can do a lot of different things with them. And I decided with this one, like you could have used maybe a 5M, but I only had a 3M in the red, so that's why I filled it in with the 3. So I'm just going around his ear. And filling that in. Filling in his lovely mullet. Okay, and now I'm just going to go through and do the shadow and the shading underneath his chin. And this one had like a little circular design on his forehead. But I decided with this one, because to me this was a Ziggy Stardust thing, I'm going to go in, and I will do it shortly, and I put the Ziggy Stardust logo, or I guess face paint, on his face. So that will be coming up, so make sure you continue watching. For those of you that are not really into doing a lot of gel plating, but are interested in possibly getting into gel plating, I really recommend it. You can start out with a smaller gel plate and see what you think and go up from there. There's so many things you can do. You just have to be aware of spacing and really just have the products, you know, the papers, whatnot, that you can use for larger gel plates. But I would recommend starting with a small one. This 5x7 is a great one to start with. So you might want to try that. This one is a gel press gel plate, but there are other brands you can get. So just tap sometimes just to let some of the ink out, but you don't want to do it too much or push down too hard, because then your pen will start to leak. So I'm just doing kind of the edges and the outlines of his fingers. I am going to be doing some painting. I'm going to be putting paint over his face, as well as doing backgrounds with some stencils. So there's lots of cool, fun things that we're going to do with this. Right now it looks kind of funny. It looks kind of weird, but it's going to turn out kind of cool. And honestly, if you want to get backgrounds, the internet, there's so many different backgrounds you can get. You could even get black and white coloring books. Coloring books are great. One thing I could have done, because I did print this on my inkjet printer, which is a toner printer, I could have just put it on the gel plate itself and done a pull that way. But I decided not to, just to show you how you can use Posca pens. So I grabbed my 5M just to fill in the larger areas, because it would just go faster and be a little bit more fluid than using a 3M. So I'm going over some of the areas just to make sure that I've got all of the areas filled in and there's no empty spots. I'm not going to do his face area though, because the 5, like the small intricate areas, because the 5 is just a slight bit bigger. I'm gonna go over the red now. It's dried a little bit. Make sure, same thing, I've got all the areas covered and there's no empty spots, so it doesn't show up like he has bald spots on his head. One thing I did do as well with my blue and brown Poscas is David Bowie has 2 different colors, or I should say had 2 different colored eyes, so I did fill them in the right spots. I did look it up on the line, so hopefully I got the right eye and the right eye, but I did color in his eyes with the 2 different colors of Posca pens. So just filling that all in, make sure you get all of the empty spots, and you'll notice that when you start going over it and it dries, you'll see where you've missed. Okay, so now I pulled my Jane Davenport acrylic paint, and this is a skin tone. It was probably the closest skin tone I had to what he has. So I decided to use that, but first I am drawing on his Ziggy Stardust makeup paint. And I tried to look at it as best as I could without going over completely his eyebrows and all that kind of stuff. Kind of went around them and did my best to try and recreate the space. His face paint is actually red, not orange, but because I did his hair in red, I decided not to use red again because I thought it might be too much. So I used the orange and the blue, and those are both 3M pens as well. I will have all the products that I used listed down below in the description. So if you want more information, you can go down below and have a look to see everything that I used. Again, just going over his lips because now that has all dried, and doing the same thing I did with his hair. Making sure everything is filled in. So with the Jane Davenport paint, when putting that on, I used a small paintbrush. I put it just in my little palette, and be very careful because I didn't want to completely go over every area. I'm just trying to do his face and hands. You want to make sure you don't go over his eyes because then he will have skin tone whites of his eyes. At this point, I'd already put in the blue and browns of his eyes. You can go over the rest of his face, but yeah, stay clear of his eyes so you don't fill in his eyes with skin tone. And I also didn't want to get outside of his body because that's where our background is going to be. So if you do go over his hair a little bit, that's not a big deal because you're not going to see it. Yeah, it should be fine, but just try and go around that area. Make sure you get his ear and his neck and his hands. That was the big things, is just getting anything that is skin tone or flesh color. And with this paint, it takes a little bit longer to dry. It was pretty runny. I had to use a little bit more, but yeah, so really it took me a while for this to dry. I had to wait a bit, which you won't be able to see, but I did have to add a little bit extra just to cover all the spaces and make sure everything was all together and there was no empty spots. But like I said, it did take, I want to say maybe 45 minutes, half hour to dry. Yeah, probably 45 minutes. So I did come back to it once I did paint it and just watched, and it still was sticky and kind of tacky to the touch. So just so you're aware, I may have added a little too much, but we will see how that turns out in the final process. I'm sure there's many other different kinds of skin tones that you could use with other different manufacturers. The only one I personally had was Jane Davenport, but I thought it worked really well. So just going over his hands, I didn't, because it wasn't even in the drawing or anything like that, but I didn't, factor out fingernails or anything like that. I just went over his hands just as hands. I didn't do any fingernails or anything like that. Part of it was too, I didn't want to take away from his face, so I left everything as neutral and as undetailed as possible. Filling in his ear. Yeah, and see, just going over a little bit. I probably shouldn't have, but because It didn't look like it was completely covered. I went over it, but that's also what took a little bit longer for it to dry, because I did put that extra in. Just clean off your brushes, and I let that dry. And then once it dried, I came back to it. I pulled out some Liquitex paints, and I decided to use these for the background. So those colors will also be listed down below in the description, so you want to check that out. I wasn't sure which ones I was going to use, but I knew I would use two. I decided to go with the yellow and with the blue, and these are the two stencils I decided to use. So again, those will also be down below in the description. This one that I used first is a script font, and I knew it probably wouldn't show out so you could read the script, which I was okay with, but I just wanted a dash of color. So that's really what I was going for, is just a little bit of dash of color to pop out. And I wanted something bright and kind of brilliant because that's kind of the person he was. So I decided to use our yellow first. And make sure, if it is going to somehow be readable, you put it the right way. So I turned it backwards so the writing wasn't visible or readable from my view. So I turned it and I put the yellow paint on. You want to hold it down securely so it doesn't move, and the paint, because you are using a paintbrush, it doesn't go underneath the stencil. It fit the stencil really well, but as you can see, I have to move it a little bit because it doesn't completely cover the stencil. If you had one that completely covered it, that would work great. And I'm not doing the whole area because you're not going to see anything that was underneath him. So I am just doing the areas that you could still see our gel plate that had nothing on the gel plate at the time. No point in wasting your product on stuff that you're not going to see. So just filling in that other area, and you can feel when you're putting the stencil on exactly where the edge is. So there's that. Again, have to just wait for that to dry, and once that dries, you can put your next level on. I'm just going to flip it and show you how it's looking so far, and I love the look of it so far. So we're just going to let that dry, and then we're going to put this stencil on. So once we put the stencil on, I'm going to use this awesome blue. Again, this is Liquitex paint, and then we're going to go from there. So now our paint has somewhat dried. It's slightly still tacky, but I thought I'm just going to go with it anyway. I put the stencil down, and it's the same thing as before. You want to be very careful that you don't go underneath the stencil, because then you won't be able to see the design. So now I'm going over it, and I used a lot of blue paint because there's a lot of open area in the stencil. And I did cover more of the area because it is our main color of our background, so I was okay with covering more space. I could have used my larger palette, it's just this one was sitting right there and easy for me to grab, so this is why I use this one, because obviously you can tell my paintbrush is too big for the holes in this little guy, but it still worked okay. So now we're covering it, and like I said before, you really only have to go around the outside edges, outside of where he had, like where his face and his body was. You don't have to cover the whole thing, but I decided to anyway, just in case. And this is not going to be the last color we use. We are going to put another color on anyway. Because this has holes in it, the space that is not covered where the stencil is still going to be exposed, so we're going to have another layer of paint on afterwards that finishes it all up. So again, all of that paint on, and now we're going to pull it, and that's how it looks now. Looks a little weird from this view, but that's how it looks now, and I just absolutely loved how that's turning out. Very cool. So now we just want to let this one dry, and then we can go on and add our other color, which for me, I was using white, And you can use any white brand of acrylic paint. This one again is a Liquitex. So I decided I probably waited 20 minutes. I found it wasn't really long enough, and you will notice that once I start putting on the white paint and brushing it. It kind of blends a little bit and turns into a little bit of an ombre look, but I was okay with that because really it's an abstract background, and I thought whatever happens, happens, because I just wanted to make sure that the face and everything turned out better. So yeah, you can see it's starting to blend a little bit, it's starting to move, but at the same time, I thought this is actually kind of cool. I'm okay with that. Just be gentle, but you could have let it dry a little bit longer. So using a lot of white, I just put a whole bunch on there, enough that I would need. Again, it's like any other project you make, less is more. You can always add more paint, but you can't take it off. So just be aware of that when you're creating. You can always add more paint. So with this one, again, we're just trying to make sure that there's no empty space. We're filling up all the empty spots and putting our paint on there. And really, this is just our finishing. And like always, when you're working with a gel plate, you're going backwards. So this is the last thing we do is the last thing you see. So it's the very background of it. The very first thing you do is the top of your gel plate creation. So now we're putting our paper down, and this is just a computer printer paper. You could have used thicker paper. I decided not to for this one. You want to get all of your areas, make sure you push it all down gently but securely, and make sure you get all the edges so you can pull a nice clean image. I let that dry for a bit because, again, we have a lot of layers there, a lot of paint, and you want to make sure it pulls okay. So this is our finished. I pulled it, and this is how it turned out. You can see there's a little bit of runniness to his face around his mouth and his nose, but otherwise I really like how it turned out. It's not bad. There's some black that we could have added a little bit more. This is how the gel plate comes out, but it's nice and easy to clean just using some wipes and some baby oil again. But this is a fun one, and you could do this again. Thanks for watching, everybody. Lots more videos coming. Bye-bye.